Picking out your own PC components can be a daunting task, and you may not even know where to start.
But luckily for you, you have us.
But before we get into that, make sure you remember these 8 base PC components.
First is the CPU or processor.
Next is the motherboard, which connects everything.
After that, it's the RAM or random access memory.
Another one is the storage, which would either be a SSD or a hard drive.
Another part is the PSU or power supply.
Another part is the GPU or graphics processing unit.
And another important part is the case because it houses all of your components.
And last but certainly not least is the CPU cooler, which keeps your CPU from becoming too hot and damaging itself.
Now that you remember the components, we can start.
Hey guys, I'm Tejas.
And I'm Anish, and we'll be your host today for the PC Masters podcast.
And since we have some experience building computers, we want to help you guys build your own.
And today will be an exciting day.
You get to pick out the parts for your next PC build.
We'll teach you how to pick out the PC parts for your budget, no matter what it is.
We'll tell you all about it right after the sponsor.
Introducing Asus TUF. We have all the best GPUs, motherboards, monitors, and more. Our products are practically cheating. Get the best without paying the price. Our hardware rigors of intense gaming sessions while delivering top-notch performance. Let me walk you through why using Asus TUF products are a no-brainer. Our products are built to last. The TUF series undergoes rigorous testing to ensure durability, making them perfect for gamers who demand reliability in their gear. Whether it's our TUF gaming laptops, motherboards, or graphics cards, you can trust that they'll stay in perfect condition for very long.
There's one major factor in picking out your own PC parts.
And that's budget. How much money do you want to set aside for building your PC is probably the biggest thing to find out whilst PC building.
So before we can dive into this episode, just think for a second. How much money can you set aside for your PC build? I'll give you a second to think. Great. Now that you know your budget, we can get started.
Establishing a budget is important because then you can figure out what performance, aesthetics, and ease of use you should have given the money spent. This helps maximize the cost effectiveness of your computer.
Now we can finally begin. Go over to PC Part Picker and and follow along with us. It's going to be the first link in the description.
Also, you should get familiar with a couple new retailers that you might find selling PC components. There's obviously the known ones like Amazon and Best Buy, but there's also retailers like Newegg and B&H that you might come across.
Now that we've established a budget, the first part you should consider is your CPU.
Now's the hard part, deciding between AMD or Intel for your CPU, which are the two major CPU brands.
What you want to look for is upgradability. Whichever company has a CPU that's upgradable is the best. This is because even after brands release their CPUs, they can still use old motherboards for the next gen. This makes it so that when you want to upgrade, you only have to replace your CPU and not the motherboard and RAM.
This means your CPU supports the latest equipment, like the latest RAM technology, latest PCIe technology, and it goes on and on.
If your current budget is tight and you just can't fit in a current gen CPU, such as the Ryzen 7 7700X, you just have to get a last generation mid-range CPU.
If you want to upgrade later on, it's best to have a CPU socket with future generations coming. For example, the AM5 CPU socket is confirmed to have future generations launched on there, or historically the AM4 CPU, which had many generations on there. If you don't know your CPU socket for your CPU, just enter your CPU's name and model number into Google and then say socket, follow it with the socket. Then it'll show you which socket it is, and then you can ask Google if it will have future generations and how many, as these are usually confirmed a couple years in advance.
There's also the topic of what the model numbers for CPUs mean, but that could be a topic that we could talk about for a whole episode itself. There are so many discrepancies, and we'll make sure to leave a video or two down in the description to explain it for both Intel as well as AMD.
The next decision you have to make is your CPU cooler. There's three cooling solutions that you should choose: air cooling, AIO, and custom loop. We won't dive we won't be diving too deep into custom loop cooler due to the fact it's very expensive and hard to do. An AIO is a cooler that uses water to cool your CPU. The water transfers the heat from the CPU to a radiator.
Similar to one you may find in a car.
Then a couple of fans cool the radiator, allowing for more heat to be transferred and the cycle to repeat.
Now let's move on to how an air cooler works. An air cooler uses a heatsink to transfer heat from the CPU to the metal heatsink.
Then a series of fans, or just one fan, will cool the heatsink, allowing for the CPU to be cooled.
When choosing between these two options, an air cooler is usually cheaper.
Air coolers also have less points of failure and can last longer than water coolers, and also in some lower end or lower wattage CPUs, there is some smaller air coolers included.
But when it comes to actually cooling, water coolers can be much more efficient than normal air coolers.
In general, a water cooler is not needed, but all depends on your budget and predicted use of the PC. Also, air coolers will also AIO coolers will be more aesthetically pleasing and usually have better cooling but are more expensive, so keep that in mind. There are also different sizes to both coolers for both AIOs and air coolers. It depends on the size of the fan, and for AIOs, it depends on the length of the fans that can be installed in total on the radiator.
Some example sizes for air coolers are 120 millimeters and 140 millimeters. For some AIO example sizes, there's 240 millimeters and 360 millimeters. The next part that you will be needing to choose is a motherboard.
A motherboard is what really brings a build together, and it supplies a lot of power and information to a PC.
The first thing you need to make sure when you get a motherboard is if it's compatible with all your parts.
I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that your motherboard needs to be compatible with your CPU. If the parts are not compatible, the PC will not turn on and will likely have ruined your motherboard and or your CPU. But luckily, the website we're using tells you whether when your parts are not compatible.
It's important to make sure that you do not overspend on your motherboards.
Motherboards do not need to be overpriced for you to get a good experience with them.
Keep in mind that after a certain point, the features that are given are not worth the price markup.
Another thing to note is that some motherboards have Wi-Fi and others don't. If your motherboard doesn't include Wi-Fi, it's not the end of the world. You can buy either a Wi-Fi card or a Wi-Fi slot that can allow you to have Wi-Fi on your motherboard just fine. These can either connect through USB or a special connector known as either a PCI lane or an M.2 lane.
When picking, although motherboards shouldn't be a large chunk of change, they're very vital to the system.
When picking out your motherboard, also be sure to look at the letter in front of the numbers in the model number. If you have an AMD CPU, the letters will either be A, B, or X. For Intel, there will either be H, B, and Z.
A and H are the worst. Generally, never get these unless on a really tight budget because the next tier up is just $10 more. These boards do not support overclocking and have in general the worst connectivity.
B series motherboards are next. We recommend these ones for 90% of builds. They are mid-range boards with some high-end features if you pay more. They have good connectivity and have a huge price range, typically $90 to all the way to $270. B series can overclock on RAM, But on Intel, they can't overclock on the CPU, but on AMD, they can overclock on the CPU. This is why on AMD, there's usually no need to go any higher than a B series unless you really need the extra connectivity.
The next tier up is the X series and the Z series. For most people, you do not need these levels of connectivity because they're very good. Unless you're a content creator with a high budget, you might not consider getting these motherboards. They're best suiting for overclocking and very, very heavy gaming.
The next part we'll discuss is RAM.
Before you do anything else, determine what RAM type is compatible with your motherboard. You just need to figure out what DDR type is compatible, and a quick Google search can tell you exactly that. Currently, the PC market is mainly a mix of DDR4 and DDR5 RAM modules. By the way, DDR stands for double data rate, meaning 2 transfers per hertz.
Once you have figured out that, choose a size. After recording this video, anywhere from 16 to 32 gigabytes of RAM is acceptable for any moderate usage builds. For more extensive loads, for video editing, we recommend at least 64 gigabytes of RAM or more. And 16 gigabytes should be the minimum right now.
We do recommend 32 gigabytes though, because 16 gigabytes is slowly but surely becoming too little. Make sure that you don't get large amounts of low storage sticks. For example, don't get 4 8 gigabyte sticks. Instead, get two 16 gigabyte sticks. This is so that you could keep some of your RAM slots open on your motherboard for future upgrades. Make sure to buy RAM sticks in multiples of 2, and we'll leave some reasons and explanations in the description.
Now it's time to determine the speed. This could be important if you plan to use your PC for gaming or editing, which requires fast recalls of data from the RAM.
We recommend anywhere from 12 nanoseconds of latency and lower. You could see the latency of your RAM by looking at PC Picker's first word latency measure. This latency is determined with the combination of its speed and cast latency. If you can't find the latency, just do this simple equation in the calculator. Take the CL timing and multiply it by 2000. Then divide your answer by the mega transfers a second of the RAM, which is that little number right after what is the when it says the DDR. Your answer should be the latency of your RAM in nanoseconds.
Oh wait, we forgot. We forgot to explain what cast latency is. Cast latency refers to how fast the RAM can respond to CPUs, and you usually see in a string of four numbers. But when doing the equation said above, only the first number of the cast latency is important.
All this number means is how many cycles it takes for your memory to send data after it's requested. So the lower the CL timing, the better.
Now to choose what type of storage and how much of it you'll be needing.
This is important because if you want to download any applications or store pictures slash editing projects, etc., you will need a good amount of storage.
Well, slow down there, buckaroo. You're first going to tell them all about the different types of storage and solid state drive versus hard drive, or SSD versus HDD.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. HDDs are a cheap and sensible way to store a lot of stuff that you're not using at the moment.
But they're not very good for your boot drive. If you want to have a fast responsive experience, you should get a solid state drive. But these are more expensive. Also note that hard drives are very fragile. If you shake them too vigorously or if they fall on the floor, it's likely that the data is corrupted. They're best placed in certain slots in your case or either an external NAS drives that are screwed down.
If you're a gamer, we recommend you invest in an SSD for your games.
You don't want to be stuck on a loading screen for 10 minutes.
Days.
Now let's elaborate on SSDs.
There are two types of SSDs as of this recording.
NVMe and SATA.
We recommend NVMe because of how much faster the drives are.
And they aren't too much more expensive than the SATA versions.
But if you're balling on a budget and are in need of some storage, a SATA SSD will do perfectly fine.
And it's faster than a hard drive. But later on, we'll be sharing some great M.2 NVMe picks for you guys.
Have you
Have,
decided
have you decided what storage you want? Great.
if you're looking to buy a hard drive or HDD for more storage for cheap? We recommend looking the RPM of the drive. That's the rotations per minute and how fast your HDD can transfer data.
We The faster the RPM of the hard drive, the faster the hard drive can transfer data. We recommend at least 7200 RPM for modern drives. Also, only buy hard drives at 2 terabytes or more. This is because a 1 terabyte or lower range, SSDs, especially SATA SSDs, are cheap enough and close enough in price to not be so much more than hard drives, and they're much faster than hard drives, giving you a much better experience overall.
Wow, that was a lot.
Definitely. We will be discovering GPUs and how to choose one that's right for you shortly after this break.
Welcome back.
Strap down and get ready because we will be covering a very heavy topic. GPU.
GPUs. GPUs are important for everything.
Yes, they're undeniably a very important part of the build, and they are also very expensive.
Yeah, they could take up around a third of your budget or more.
First, you want to determine the budget that you wish to allocate to your GPU.
Now, for this decision, should you go with NVIDIA or Radeon?
This decision entirely depends on the current state of the GPU market. Currently, Radeon or AMD is providing better cost effectiveness and raw performance, but Nvidia has a better feature set and compatibility with pro level software.
It, it relies on the market at the moment, and you should have to see which one yields better prices. We would also recommend watching some videos on common good GPUs with a great price to performance ratio.
There's no better company for GPUs at the moment, and they're trading blows with each other in terms of new features and abilities.
You just have to see which GPU has a better price to performance ratio at the moment.
Be sure to look at different applications you'll be frequently using and looking at which brand it works better with. For example, the software Blender works best with Nvidia, and the game Starfield is best with AMD. So if your favorite game works better on one of them, just you can lean towards that brand. Also, keep in mind ray tracing. If you're interested in that, currently and probably for the next couple of years, Nvidia will be ahead of AMD if you're interested in that.
Now, here's how the naming scheme works for NVIDIA. It either begins with GTX or RTX. RTX just means it supports ray tracing, and GTX doesn't. Then the next two numbers indicate the generation. For example, RTX 3070 means 30 is a generation, but every time there's a new generation, it increases by 10. So it goes 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. The next two numbers are what performance tier the card is. The highest is 90 and the lowest is either 60 or 50 depending on the generation. For example, is the RTX 4080. You could tell this is the 40th generation and the tier is one lower than the highest. Sometimes there's a suffix to these model numbers. They could be either TI Super, showing that the card it shows is upgraded, or 4080 Super and GTX 1080 Ti.
Now, with the naming scheme for AMD is a bit different. It will always start with RX. Doesn't matter if it supports some features or not. The first number is its generation. The next two numbers indicate its tier. The second the second number is the main number you need to look at for the tier, depending on generation. It can range anywhere from 4 to up to 9. The second number, or the third number, will either be a 0 or 5. 0 always means just a normal GPU, and 5 means a factory overclock. The last number will always be a 0. And you might either see XT or XTX after the numbers. And XT is just an upgraded version of the normal one, and XTX is one tier above the XT. Also, if you want support for ray tracing, you have to look specifically at the generation to see what it is, since there's no naming scheme for that. An example for this is an RX 6700 XT. You can tell this is generation 6, then the tier is 70, meaning there's no overclock, and it's right in the middle, is as it's in the middle of the 4 and 9 range, and XT means it's upgraded version of the 6700.
That sure was a lot.
Well, GPUs are very important. Now let me explain the case and why you should get one.
The case's main purpose is to protect the parts inside from static and dust, which could damage your computer greatly and irreparably.
It also influences good airflow and cooling, as well as helping with cable management and keeping the build aesthetically pleasing.
Some things to note are that you need to make sure that all the parts fit inside the chosen case.
Check your case's GPU clearance, cooler clearance, and make sure the motherboard fits inside your case, that your case supports all of your parts. This is something that PC part picker tells you if you look at the spec of the case, but I recommend looking at case reviews. Also, your case will also have a size to it, which will mirror motherboards. So, say if your motherboard is a MATX, you can get a MATX case, and MATX is just in the middle size. ATX is a full size, which meaning you have to get an ATX case.
The last part to choose is your power supply.
This is extremely important, and you don't want to skimp on this. You don't want to have a bad PSU because it can destroy every other component and explode, which can be a very costly mistake.
On the other hand, this part is the reason that the computer turns on at all. Without it, there would be zero power and your computer wouldn't boot.
First, determine the predicted wattage that your PC would require. PC part picker tells you this at the top, right at the top, and it's in a blue label.
Then take that value and multiply it by at least 1.5.
This is so you have some wiggle rooms in terms of power in case you want to upgrade your PC in the future, or you want to connect some USB peripherals, which, yes, USB peripherals can take up a significant amount of power if you have a few connected.
Then look at the efficiency rating as well. Unless you're on a tight budget, never get a power supply that says 80 plus white or just 80 plus. Also, never get non-rated PSUs.
Now look at the PSU tier list link in the description.
Now look at all the tiers. Make sure that the PSU you picked out is in the tier your build is in. For example, if you're doing a budget build, check tier C or higher.
Pro tip, if you're having trouble finding which tier your PSU is in, just do Control F on the website. There should be a pop-up to help you find your PSU on that page. Then just type in the brand of the PSU. Example, if you have a Corsair RM850E, just type in Corsair. Then go through all the options that are highlighted until you find the PSU that you've picked out.
Pat yourself on the back. You just chose the parts for your PC.
If are you still unsure of what to build with your PC with?
We will be showing you some part lists to help you guys decide.
Also,
Also,
there's a topic of buying used parts. Firstly, yes, that's totally okay. If you're willing to give up a few years of lifespan on that component for a great deal.
just make sure that you're getting a good deal. Look at a couple of videos showing recent pricing of used components and check between multiple sellers to see the best price. Also buy on reputable sites such as eBay and java.gg.
So first we have a $500 list that's up on your screen right now. It's Slightly over, but that's okay. Uh, it has a Intel i3 12100F, which this processor is really good. Though since we were on a tighter budget, we couldn't really fit in the upgradability, but you still can, since this is the new generation that's coming out in a few months, will not be supported with this motherboard that we faked out. But that's fine since you still have two more upgrade generations, 13th gen and 14th gen. So if you want to upgrade, you still have some space. Next is this motherboard. It's a B series motherboard, like we said, and it includes two RAM slots, which is totally fine for budget builds, and some space for a Wi-Fi add-in card, and two M.2 slides in case you want to add in some more storage. It also has great I/O with a USB-C port, and it has great connectivity, especially for this low price. Next up, we have DDR4 16 gigabytes of RAM. This is just your standard RAM. Next, we have your SSD. This is a 480 gigabyte SSD, which is higher than some builds, which you might see 256 gigabytes. So, and this is a Gen 3, so it's gonna be decently fast, but not super fast. But it will be much faster than your standard hard drive, or say the SSD. And this plugs directly into your motherboard. Next up, we have our GPU. Wow, so exciting! This is a great GPU for this price. And I can't believe we managed to snag this deal and we managed to find this. As this GPU goes toe to toe with the RX 6600, which is about $190 to $200 GPU. And it has 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which is good enough for these lower price range as you can't upgrade it. Next, we have the Sama um, ATX case. This is just a normal case. It has some airflow, but if you had a little bit more budget, I would recommend spending maybe $10 more on this case so you can have a better airflow case. But it does have one included fact. It has one included fan in the back, which is great. And last but not least, we have the MSI Mag A550BN. So this meets the criteria of doing the times 1.5 with their wattage as it's a 550 watt PSU. It's also a C tier 80 plus bronze, meaning it fits in our criteria. So it fits perfectly with this build and it's cheap. And yeah, that's our build.
Next up, we have a $1,000 build. This is for you mid range, just want to play games and chill. First, we got a Ryzen 5 7600. This CPU is pretty good for the price and it has a really great upgrade path, which means you can upgrade later on and you don't have to worry about having keeping a bad CPU for the rest of your life. Next, we have the CPU cooler, pretty good for the price, good budget mid-range cooler, and it has a great aesthetic look. Next,
And
our
don't
case.
forget this is a white aesthetic build, which is different than the rest and normally white aesthetic builds will cost about $20 more than normal builds. So just keep that in mind in case you want to make these go a little cheaper.
Next, we have an AS Rock motherboard. It's AM5, which is the latest gen, and also it comes with Wi-Fi, which is a really good plus. And another thing to notice is that it's micro ATX. Our memory is just like an ADATA, your normal DDR5, but this time we can get 32 gigabytes with 6,000 megatransfers a second, which is really good for only $90. Our storage is your average M.2 drive, except it's for PCIe 4.0 NVMe, and it's pretty fast for $60, especially since you're getting a whole terabyte. Then we got our GPU. Our GPU is pretty beefy. It has a whole 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and it's a 7600 XT overclocked. The OC basically just means overclocked, and it's a really good card at the moment. It's part of the latest gen. Our case is a really nice white aesthetic case, and it has some really good airflow, and it comes with RGB fans, which is really good for the price of only $79.
And don't forget, this case is also really easy to build with, as there's a multiple PC case reviews about this case, all talking fabulous things about it.
And our PSU is pretty good. It's an MSI mag, and we followed that multiply by 1.5 rule, and it's 80 plus bronze, which meets the criteria. And that's the $1,000 build.
And I forgot to mention the $500 build. The cooler, it's not showing up because the cooler's included with the CPU. So when you open up the CPU box, there's also be a small cooler in there. So now moving on to the $1,500 build. So we start off with the 7700X. This is an amazing CPU with 8 cores. All the previous ones have had either 6 or 4 cores, and this is the first 8-core CPU. This is probably the highest you need, even if you're a content creator. And it's super fast and has amazing upgradability, as it's confirmed to have upgradability to the next AMD generation. Next up, we have this AIO, which is great bang for the buck, and it provides really good cooling. And it's a 240 millimeter AIO cooler. And it's RGB. Who doesn't like RGB? Next up, we have the Gigabyte B650 Eagle. This is an amazing looking motherboard. It's nice and sleek, it has multiple RAM slots, its connectivity is amazing, it has Wi-Fi built in, multiple slots for your extra add-in cards, and multiple M.2 area slots to put in more storage devices. It's just a very good motherboard overall. Next, we have 32 gigabytes of RAM, and this is 5600 CL32. It's pretty good, and it's RGB. More RGB, yay! Next up, we have the Crucial P3 Plus 2 terabyte. For a $1,500 build, 2 terabytes is very good, and it's Gen 4, meaning it's guaranteed to be very fast. Next up, we have the Zotac 4070 Super, RTX 4070 Super. This is a graphics card released by Nvidia pretty recently, actually, and they've actually done an amazing job with this. This has support with all of the latest features like DLSS and art and ray tracing, and it's just an overall good card for the money, which is $600. It has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which should be enough for the next few years for PC gaming. Next up, we have the same PC case as our last build with black. This is just because this PC case is just so amazing that it can fit multiple price ranges. And like we said, it's very easy to build in and it looks amazing. Last but not least, we have a Corsair RM850E. We follow the times 1.5 rule again, and this is an A tier power supply, so it's guaranteed to be very good. It's also modular, meaning which we have not discussed yet, but it just means that most PSUs, all the cables are pre-attached, but you don't need all those cables, so they can just build up in the bottom of your computer and kind of be annoying to deal with since you just need to shove them at the bottom of your computer. But modularity just means you can only put the wires that you need and just leave the wires that you don't that would be taking up unnecessary space. Just you can just take them out and just put them on the side. And yeah, that pretty much wraps up our $1,500 build.
Next up, we're going to be talking about the $2,000 build. These are for all those high end, want the best of the best. Basically, we start out with the CPU, a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D. This is an 8-core processor and basically the best you can get for gaming right now. It has the X3D indicates of a really good 3D V cache, which basically means increased gaming performance. Then we have our 360 millimeter AIO, which is insane for the price. It's really good, and the included fans are awesome. And personally, I've worked with this AIO, and I can say that it's recommended. Next, our motherboard is an X series AM5 motherboard. X series basically means it has all the best connectivity features as previously mentioned, and it doesn't look bad in my opinion. I kind of like all the features it includes.
And do include that little plastic piece that's coming off that can be removed.
Then the next part is the memory. The memory is really good. It's DDR5, 6,000 mega transfers a second, and its CL latency is only 30, which is pretty good. And don't forget to mention how it has RGB. And then we have our storage, 2 terabytes. I wouldn't expect any less from a $2,000 build, and it's the latest NVMe M.2 connectivity, which means it will be pretty fast.
And it's a Samsung 980 Pro, meaning it's guaranteed to have a really, really long lifespan, as Samsung is known to have some of the best SSDs out there.
Then we have our GPU. This is a beast of a GPU. It's the 4070 Ti Super. It's basically it's basically a beefed up, better version of the $1,500 build with an extra 4 gigabytes of VRAM for a total of 16 gigabytes. And also, its cooling, its efficiency, everything about it is just better. Then we have our case. Our case is perfect. It's awesome to build in, it's really easy to use, and it comes with fans and it has really good airflow as well as support for the largest of the large GPUs.
Not to mention, it looks really cool with the two glass panel look, as you can look through it with both ways, unlike most cases.
Then our power supply. This power supply is just a trooper. It can handle most GPUs and most loads that you throw at it, and it's a Corsair power supply, which means it's guaranteed to work for a while, and usually they have really good warranties and support. And also, it's another fully modular power supply, which means it will just be more efficient and it will be easier to work with when you're doing annoying things like cable management. And that sums up the $2,000 build.
Okay, so I'm gonna show you my PC build. So I'm rocking the Ryzen 7 7700X. You actually why it's so cheap, why it's showing up so cheap for me is because I got a deal from a Micro Center, which is basically just a store dedicated to selling um computer parts. So if you live near a Micro Center, go check them out since they have some amazing deals. 7700X is just a beast of a CPU, like we explained in one of our previous builds. Then I have the Thermalright Frost Spirit 140, which is an air cooler. It's a pretty good air cooler and it works pretty fine, but I would I'm thinking about changing mine as it doesn't look that well in my case. Next up, I have the MSI B650 um, motherboard, which came in a bundle with my CPU, which is why it's so cheap. It has Wi-Fi included, good connectivity, and I really can't complain about anything. Next up is my RAM. It's a DDR5 6000 megahertz, but as at like a slightly slower CL36. But it's overall really good, 32 gigabytes. Next up, this I snagged this a couple months ago, and the overall from then, the the SSD market has risen its prices quite a bit. So I managed to get this for only $90 for 2 terabytes, which is it's an insanely fast solid state drive, and I would recommend it to anybody if they can find it around this price again. Then you might notice there's a component missing, which is the GPU, which unfortunately, when I was buying my parts, my GPU never arrived and I never ordered a GPU again. But hopefully, I will be ordering a second one soon, which will most likely be the 4070 Super. My case is the Fractal Design Pop Air. I just love this case because of the blue painted accents and the included RGB fans. It was pretty decent to work in. There could be a little bit more space at the bottom, but you can make some more space at the bottom for ease of power supply installation if you remove the hard drive mounts. Next up is the Thermaltake GF1. 850 watts, really good, and it's silent and sometimes there's a little buzzing noise when it goes away, and that's completely normal for some power supplies. And it's a A-tier rated power supply. Hopefully, I get a GPU so this power supply can actually be used. As right now, as you can see in my wattage, this power supply is not even breaking a sweat. And then I just have some of my peripherals, which I can go over briefly. The Red Dragon gaming keyboard, a pretty solid, cheapest mechanical keyboard I could find. G305 Lightspeed, really recommend it if you're looking for a mouse under $60. Extremely good. And Razer Nari Essential, it's pretty good. So Anish, what's your build like?
Well, my build is really similar to yours. I actually got the same exact bundle as you. I got my CPU, my motherboard, and my RAM in that bundle. The only reason the prices aren't changed is because I'm showing the prices as they are right now in retailers just to show you what it's like. And basically, I have a Ryzen 7 7700X, absolute demon in terms of gaming, as I love to play games. And then I have a Deepcool LS520, which is a 240 millimeter AIO, which can easily cool my CPU when it's under load or stress. It's very good, and I haven't been hearing any weird noises from it like I expected. And I have my MSI B650, same motherboard. It has good Wi-Fi, good PCIe connectivity, and it has really nice M.2 compatibility and speeds. I have this RAM, which I like the mega transfers per second, but it has a high latency, but it's really good, really fast. I have no complaints about it because I never noticed it getting hot or like skipping a beat. Then my storage, I'm not too proud of it. I salvaged parts from around my house for my storage. I have a 500 gigabyte internal hard drive, and then I have a Crucial MX500 SATA SSD, which is
Bro,
just
you really need to step up your storage space. Okay?
yeah, I do. I'm planning maybe if the SSD prices went down, I might get a new one. And I actually have two GPUs. The reason they're so like random is because I actually got them from a friend. Basically, I have a Quadro P2000 and a P2200. I have other GPUs just lying around the house, but these are the two ones I'm currently using, and they're pretty good GPUs. They're better than the internal GPU that Tejas has, and they're pretty fast, and I'm grateful for them. My case,
And just for comparison, his one of his quadros is kind of similar to a GTX 1660 Ti if you're gonna compare it, and the other one is kind of like a GTX 1650-ish, 1650 Super.
yeah, my case is a Corsair 3000D RGB Airflow. I like the case. Sometimes it can be a bit annoying because I'm not very good at cable management, but it's not a bad case. I'm just like a bad cable manager. But other than that, I have no complaints because it has really good RGB, really good airflow, and also it has dust filters almost everywhere so that your computer never gets dirty on the inside. My power supply is a pretty good power supply. It's an A tier on the PSU tier list, and it's fully modular, very efficient. Never hear anything from it. And my PC is not really working because my GPUs don't take up much power. So I never hear any noises from it. And I actually got a great deal on this. I got it for almost only $99 compared to the 160 it is right now. So like I'm proud of it. I like it. So that's my build. If you would ever like to like get inspired from any of our builds, feel free to. We don't care, really, at all.
Just make sure how we picked out our parts was based on pricing a couple of months ago. So if the pricing is like a lot more expensive or there's um new technology out, then make sure to go with that or go with something else. So don't just copy your build since as it might not apply to you. So you just chose the parts for your PC.
It wasn't so hard after all, right? Give yourself a pat on the back.
I know I sure did. Now that you have all the parts, make sure it's in your budget and now you can order them. Finally, a break.
Now you can be excited every time a package arrives at the door with the anticipation that it's a part for your computer.
For sure. I know that I was definitely excited. But when all your parts finally come, check out our next episode where we tell you how to build your computer. It will be very in depth and useful for any first time builders or new builders. Also, be sure to check warranties of parts and be sure to return and get replacements of any damaged parts in shipping or if you accidentally ordered the wrong thing.
Make sure to be on the lookout for our next episode in a few days.
All resources we list in the description as well as every all the links that we said.
Thanks for tuning in today. Be sure not to miss tomorrow's episode on how to assemble your new parts.
Until next time.